I want to tell you something that completely changed the way I look at people. And interestingly enough, it's also changed the way I look at AI. Now, this you see this right here? This my kind of AI, okay? I can handle this level. I just wish it had the other button so you could push the rings up on both sides at the same time. But enough with my dino water game. One of the things that I've always been fascinated by is human behavior. Why do people do what they do? Why do good people sometimes make bad decisions? Why do organizations start with really good intentions and end up somewhere completely different? And why do some people or companies hold on to their values even when it costs them? Those questions interest me far more than politics, far more than technology itself, because underneath everything, there's people, kind of like you and me, that are making these decisions, and people leave clues. So here's something I've learned over the years. If you really want to understand someone, don't just listen to what they say. Watch what they do. Watch where they spend their time. Watch where they spend their money. Watch who they protect. Watch what they're willing to sacrifice. Because behavior, well, it's harder to fake than words. Now, before anybody gets nervous, this isn't going to be some conspiracy theory episode. Actually, it's quite the opposite. This is about learning to notice patterns that are happening right out in the open. Patterns that most of us simply just don't think to look for, because once you learn to notice them, you will start seeing them everywhere. You'll see them in families, in churches, businesses, governments, even ourselves. And over the last year, I've noticed something I couldn't ignore. Every single week, another company announces another billion-dollar investment into artificial intelligence. Another CEO says AI is the future. Another government signs a big contract. Another data center is getting built or being argued over being built. Another company buys hundreds of thousands of dollars in computer chips. And I kept asking myself, what are they seeing that the rest of us aren't? Because people don't just spend hundreds of billions of dollars just because they're interested in something. Well, I don't. I don't even have hundreds of billions of dollars. But just like me, you probably don't either. And organizations don't just completely reinvent themselves unless they believe the future depends on it. So today, I don't really want to talk about ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or Grok. Those are interesting, and I'll definitely continue to talk more on them in the future, but they're not actually the story for today. The story today is the race that's underneath them, the people building them, the money that's funding them, the decisions that they're making. Because artificial intelligence isn't just becoming software, it's becoming infrastructure. Now, that's one of those words that people throw around all the time. Infrastructure simply means it's the basic system in society everyone depends on. Railroads once became our infrastructure, electricity became our infrastructure, the internet became our infrastructure. Cell phones have become part of our infrastructure. Most of us don't spend much time thinking about them anymore, and it's because they've become part of everyday life. And AI seems like it's following that exact same path. Then maybe the most important question isn't what can AI do? Maybe it's really who's building it, who owns it, and who gets to decide how it's used. So, before we jump in, let's do an episode recap from last week's AI episode. We're going to explore today. Not through fear, not through politics, through human behavior. Because behavior always leaves clues. And today I'm going to show you one of the clearest examples I've ever found. where a company had to choose between a fortune and a principle that it said it believed in. What happened next tells us far more than any mission statement ever could. Last time, we asked one simple question: what is artificial intelligence? What is AI? And I think the answer was surprising for people. AI isn't magic, it's not conscious, it isn't alive. It doesn't have feelings, it isn't secretly plotting to take over the world that we know of, at least not in the AI that we know exists today. AI is simply computer software that's been trained to recognize patterns, make predictions, understand language, and perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. Sometimes that's in writing, sometimes it's in translating languages, sometimes it's recognizing faces, other times it's recommending your next Netflix show. The important thing to remember is that AI doesn't think the way that people think. It calculates like really, really well. Then we talked about the three levels of AI. The first one was narrow AI. That's everything that we actually have today, like ChatGPT, Google Maps, Siri, Alexa, Spotify recommendations, your spam filters on your phone calls and your email, the facial recognition that unlocks your phone. They're all examples of narrow AI. They're incredibly good at one particular job, but that's all they do. The next level was AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. This doesn't exist, at least not yet. AGI would be able to learn almost any intellectual human task. It could solve a medical problem, then write a movie script, then learn a new language, then design a bridge, all without needing an entirely different AI for each new task. That's what many of today's biggest AI companies say they're trying to build. And then there's a third level. It's often called ASI, which is like the Superman of artificial intelligence. It's the idea of an intelligence that eventually becomes more capable than humans across almost every intellectual area. Right now, it's still Hollywood, it's still theoretical. Nobody has built it. Nobody actually even agrees on what it would look like. So today, we're still living entirely in the world of narrow AI. But the people building today's AI systems believe that they're building towards something much bigger, which brings us to today's question. If these companies are investing billions of dollars and they believe AI is going to be as important as electricity or the internet, who are these companies? So let's meet the players. We'll keep it simple. Think of today's AI world like a race. There's several major teams. Each one has a different strategy, a different personality, and a different vision of the future. The first one we'll talk about is OpenAI. If you've ever used ChatGPT, you've used OpenAI's technology. For millions of people, ChatGPT was their first real hands on experience with artificial intelligence. They're one of the companies most responsible for bringing AI into our everyday conversation. Then we have Google. You already know Google, you've probably been using Google for years. But Google owns one of the world's most advanced research organizations called DeepMind. If OpenAI surprised the world, Google is trying to make sure it doesn't lose the future it helped create. Next, we have Anthropic. Now, Anthropic isn't as famous, but pay attention to this company because one word has become central to Anthropic's identity: safety. When they talk about AI, they talk constantly about building systems that are helpful, honest, and safe. Remember that word, because later in this episode, we're going to see what happened when safety became costly for them. Then there's XAI. This is Elon Musk AI company. It's the company behind the chatbot called Grok. More recently, XAI became part of SpaceX, which means one company now has rockets, satellites, internet infrastructure, Yeah, and one of the world's leading AI labs. That's a fascinating combination. And finally, we have Meta. Meta is the company that's behind Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Now, Meta is spending enormous amounts of money to compete in the AI race, and it's not because social media is disappearing, but it's because they believe AI will shape whatever comes next. You might be wondering, why should I even care who owns these companies? And that's a fair question. Most of us don't know who built the electrical grid, we don't know who built the internet, and we don't know who manufactures the chips inside of our phones or computers. Until one day, those things become so important that they shape nearly every part of our lives. AI is quickly becoming one of those technologies. The people who understand new infrastructure early usually have more choices than the people who don't. So, this episode isn't about turning you into a computer scientist or a tech junkie. It's about helping regular everyday people just like you and me understand one of the biggest shifts that's happening in our lifetime. Because once you understand who's building AI, you start to understand something even more important. What incentives are shaping the future they are building? And that is where our story really begins. One of the easiest mistakes we can make is assuming this is just another technology trend. We've seen technology come and go before. The first smartphones, social media, cryptocurrency, virtual reality. Some changed the world, some didn't. So, what makes AI different? Well, instead of answering that, let me ask you a question. Imagine tomorrow morning. Every major car manufacturer announced they were spending hundreds of billions of dollars to build electric airplanes, not cars, airplanes. And then every government started investing in it too. Universities began creating entirely new degree programs. The power companies started building new infrastructure. Construction companies just began building massive new factories. Would you think, huh, that's interesting? Or would you think, okay, what's going on? What do they know that I don't know? What's happening? This is exactly what's happening with AI right now, except instead of airplanes, it's intelligence. Here's something that surprised me. These companies aren't spending millions, they're spending hundreds of billions. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars. And it's not because AI is making funny pictures on the internet. Come on. It's because they believe intelligence itself is becoming the infrastructure. And history tells us whoever builds the infrastructure often shapes the future. Not always, but often. So let's meet the players in this race. We have OpenAI. Now, this is the company most people know. If you've used ChatGPT, you've already interacted with them. ChatGPT was not the first AI, not even close, but it was the product that suddenly made millions of ordinary people stop and say, wait, this is actually useful. Almost overnight. AI stopped feeling like science fiction with ChatGPT. It became something people use to write emails, plan their vacations, study for school, brainstorm ideas, or even ask relationship advice. It became something that teachers had to warn their students not to use to do their homework. Now, here's something interesting. OpenAI didn't begin as a traditional business. It started as a nonprofit organization. Its founders believed that artificial intelligence might eventually become one of the most powerful technologies humanity ever created, and they wanted the technology developed responsibly. Over time, building AI became incredibly expensive. Training today's most advanced AI systems require enormous computing power, thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of specialized computer chips working together for weeks or months that cost billions of dollars, which meant OpenAI eventually needed investors. And one of their biggest was Microsoft. Microsoft had invested tens of billions of dollars into OpenAI, not because it wanted another chatbot, because it believes AI is going to be central to nearly every product in the future. Windows, Office, Azure, Search, everything. Behavior leaves clues. Microsoft isn't investing because AI is popular. They're not investing because they want more funny cat pictures. It's investing because it believes AI is foundational. Then we have Google. All right, now most of us know Google. Google's been around for a little while at this point. So, Google has been working on AI for much longer than most people realize. It was working on AI long before ChatGPT even became famous. Google researchers were publishing many of the breakthroughs that made today's AI possible. In fact, one of the most influential research papers in modern AI, called Attention is All You Need, came from Google researchers. And if you're wondering why that's important, it's because much of today's AI is built on the ideas from that paper. Google also owns a company called DeepMind. DeepMind became famous years ago when one of its AI systems defeated the world's best Go players. Go is one of the most complex games ever created. Experts believed computers were still years away from mastering it, and DeepMind showed up and proved otherwise. Today, Google's AI products are called Gemini. Google already dominates internet search. For years, people searched the internet, and Google made money from advertising. It was simple. AI changes that equation. If people stop searching and start asking AI instead, Google's entire business has to evolve. Again, behavior leaves clues. Google isn't investing billions of dollars because it enjoys the competition. It's investing because standing still can cost it its future. Now, let's talk about the company that fascinates me the most, Anthropic, okay? So, compared to Google or Microsoft, Anthropic is much smaller. Most people have never heard of it, but don't let the size fool you. Some of the smartest AI researchers in the world work at Anthropic. Their AI assistant is called Claude. If ChatGPT is known for being versatile, Claude has built a reputation for being thoughtful and careful and very good at long conversations and writing. I will say I have experimented across multiple AIs, and I noticed there are some things that Claude is much better at than Grok or ChatGPT. But I'm not the expert, and my opinion doesn't matter. But here's what makes Anthropic different. From the beginning, the company built its idea around one word: safety, over and over and over. They've said their goal isn't just building more powerful AI. They say they truly want to build AI that's helpful, honest, and harmless. Now, we all know companies are just like politicians. They say lots of pretty things that sound wonderful. And every company has values hanging on a wall somewhere, on a pamphlet, on a web page, somewhere. The real question is, what happens when those values become expensive for that company? Remember that question. What happens when those values start to cost that company money? Because in a few minutes, we're going to watch Anthropic answer it. And honestly, it's one of the most interesting business stories I've seen in years. Talk about putting your money where your mouth is. All right, I digress. Let's move on to XAI. Then there's Elon Musk. Love him, hate him, disagree with him. Either way, it's Elon. It's hard to ignore him. His AI company is called XAI. The chatbot is Grok. But here's what caught my attention. XAI isn't just building software, it's connected to SpaceX. Now, let's think about that for a moment. XAI, Elon Musk, Grok is now connected to SpaceX. Let's all think about that for a minute. One organization is building rockets, launching satellites, providing internet through Starlink, working with governments around the world, and building the frontier of AI. That's an unusual combination because suddenly AI isn't just software anymore. It's connected to communications and space and our physical infrastructure. Again, I'm not telling you whether that's good or bad, it's just a really interesting recipe. I'm simply asking you to notice the pattern. Remember, behavior leaves clues. Finally, we have Meta. Now, Meta is the company behind Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. I think most of us are familiar with the name Mark Zuckerberg. So, Mark Zuckerberg has made it very clear that he believes AI is the next major computing platform. So Meta is spending enormous amounts of money building data centers, hiring researchers, and developing its own AI systems. Its AI model is called Llama. Unlike some competitors, Meta has made much of its technology open source, meaning that outside developers can download it and build on it. That's a different strategy. Whether it turns out to be the right one or not, we don't know yet. So, those are the major players, different companies, different strategies, different leaders, different vision of what the future is going to look like. But something else started standing out to me. When I looked closely, I realized that these companies aren't just competing, they're connected. They're connected through investors, cloud computing, computer chips, government contracts, through partnerships. And then I decided I wanted to follow those connections down their little yellow brick road. And I learned that this story isn't just about technology anymore, it's about incentives. Kind of sounds like politics again. Oh well. So, these incentives have a way of revealing what people in organizations value most. In the next part, I want to tell you about a $200 million decision that perfectly illustrates what I mean when I say behavior leaves clues. All right, guys. The $200 million question is here. All right. Remember what I said at the beginning of this episode. Every organization has an identity. Every organization has incentives. And eventually, those collide. So, when these worlds collide, that's when behavior becomes more interesting than words because values are easy if they're not costing you anything. They're really easy when they look pretty and sound great on a website or a pamphlet or printed on a wall somewhere because they're not really costing you anything at that time. It's easy to say, we care about safety, we put people first, we'll always do the right thing. I did not have sexual relations with that woman. I mean, something like that. Almost every company has something like that on its website. But what happens when doing the right thing costs you millions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars? That's where we stop reading mission statements and start watching the behavior. So, let me tell you a story. In 2025, the United States Department of Defense, which is the branch of the United States government that's responsible for the military, it decided that it wanted to use some of the world's most advanced artificial intelligence systems, not 10 years from now, like now, they wanted to use it. The government believed that AI could help with things like sorting through huge amounts of information, helping analysts make sense of intelligence, improving our cybersecurity, and planning complicated operations. Do you notice something? Something's missing. Oh, yeah. None of these sound like killer robots. They sound like pretty ordinary, reasonable things. That's one reason these conversations can be confusing. Technology usually doesn't arrive all at once. It becomes a part of everyday work, one small step at a time. So, the Department of Defense invited several of the leading AI companies to participate, and among them was Anthropic. That's the company that we talked about earlier. It's the one that built their identity around one word, and that one word was safety. There was a government contract that was worth up to $200 million. Think about that for a second. A $200 million contract was on the table. $200 Million. Okay. I must be really poor. That just sounds like a lot to me. Most of us can't imagine that amount of money. For most companies, that's kind of a big deal. That's the kind of opportunity you celebrate. You hold a press conference, you tell your investors, you put it in your annual report. Everything looked like business as usual until the rules of that contract was changed. As the agreement with the United States Department of Defense was being renewed, government officials proposed new language describing how AI could be used. On paper, it was just a few words, but sometimes a few words change everything. According to Anthropic's public explanation, those few words, the proposed language that was used, it would have allowed broader lawful uses that the company believed could include applications that it wasn't comfortable supporting. Specifically, Anthropic said it did not want its AI systems used for broad domestic surveillance or for fully autonomous weapon systems that could select and engage targets without meaningful human control. Now, should we slow that down? I don't know if I can rewind this or not. Anthropic did not want its AI systems used for broad domestic surveillance. They also did not want their AI systems being used for autonomous weapons systems that could select and engage targets without any meaningful human control. Whether or not you agree on Anthropic's position, that's not the point, okay? The point is this: they believed that the change in the language crossed the line, and suddenly their identity and their incentives were pulling in different directions. On one side, there was a contract worth up to $200 million. And over here on the other side, there was this principle, this value they had spent years telling the public that mattered to them. Remember that word safety? This is where the story gets interesting because now there's something to lose. They could sacrifice their value of safety to obtain this $200 million contract, or they could sacrifice the contract for no incentive and keep their value of safety. This is where we pause because now there's a behavior we can watch. There's something to lose. Words have to match actions. A kind of put your money where your mouth is situation here. So let's watch the behavior. Imagine for a moment that this isn't a technology company. Imagine that it's just a regular, everyday person like me or you. And someone says, I always tell the truth. That's easy until telling the truth costs them something. Someone says, my family comes first. That's easy until a promotion requires moving away. Someone says, my faith is the most important thing in my life. Well, that's easy until following faith creates conflict. We don't really discover our priorities until two good things pull us in opposite directions. People have moments where they have to decide which value wins. That's why I find this AI story so fascinating. Not because it's about AI, but it's about the people involved in AI. People sitting in conference rooms, people weighing risks, people asking, what are we willing to stand behind, even if it hurts? Those aren't technology questions. Those are human questions for all of us. So Anthropic had a choice. Anthropic ultimately declined to accept the language it believed conflicted with its stated values. That decision had consequences for them. Other companies continued pursuing these government partnerships. The broader AI race kept moving forward. Again, I'm not telling you who the heroes are. I don't think it's that simple. Maybe another company looked at the exact same situation and honestly believed that participating would make the technology safer. Maybe a different company believed that national security required cooperation. Reasonable people can disagree. And that's okay. My job isn't to hand you the conclusions. My job is just to invite you to notice something. When pressure increased, every organization revealed a little bit more about themselves. Not because of what I said, because of what they did, because of the choice they made, because of their behavior. I want you to notice that when pressure increased, every one of those organizations revealed a little bit more about themselves. And it's not because of what it said, it's because of the behavior it chose. The behavior left clues. So, the lesson, and honestly, I think it applies to every one of us. It's easy to think, I'd never. Oh, I'd never. Until life puts us in a situation that we've never faced before. And maybe that's why I've become less interested in judging people and more interested in understanding incentives because incentives are powerful. They don't just influence behavior, sometimes they reveal it. Now, here's where the story gets even bigger because once I started looking at the companies, I noticed something else. They weren't just competing against one another, they were connected. The same investors, the same cloud computing companies, the same chip manufacturers, the same governments. And the deeper I looked, the more it felt less like five separate races and more like one enormous ecosystem, and that's where our map of AI and who's involved starts to come into better focus. As I started researching all of this, I realized something. Sometimes I was asking the wrong question. I kept asking which company is going to come out on top, who's going to win, but that's not really the interesting question. The more interesting question is what kind of future are they trying to build? Because here's what's fascinating. These companies compete with one another every single day, but they're also connected. Some build the software, some build the computer chips, some build the massive data centers where the AI runs, some provide the cloud computing that makes everything possible, some invest in multiple companies at the same time, some work with governments, some compete, while also depending on one another. It's less like five separate races and more like an entire ecosystem of like a dysfunctional family. Think about building a house. One company pours the foundation, another frames the walls, another installs the wiring, another does the roof. They're all doing different jobs, but they're building the same house. And AI feels a lot like that. One company writes the models, another builds the chips, another builds the cloud, another builds the electricity, another builds the software millions of us eventually use. No single company controls every piece. But together, they are building something much larger than any one product. And that's why I think paying attention matters. It's not because we should be afraid, it's because understanding gives us choices. One of my favorite quotes is this: the most powerful things don't take over by force, they take over by going unnoticed. Think about electricity. You probably haven't thought about electricity today until the power goes out. The internet, most of us don't think about it until it stops working. GPS, search engines, cell phones, they all have quietly become a part of everyday life. Nobody woke up one morning and said, well, today society completely changed. No, it happened one small step at a time. One update, one app, one convenience, one habit, until eventually we couldn't imagine life without them. AI is following that exact same path. And it's not because anyone's forcing us, it's because sometimes it's useful, it's convenient, it's helpful, normal. That's why I don't think the biggest question is, will AI replace humans? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think anyone truly knows. But I do think a much better question is, how do we make sure we stay intentional while this technology becomes ordinary? Here's another thing I've noticed. Every generation has had something that changed the world. The printing press, electricity, cars, television, the internet, smartphones. Our generation is living through another one. The interesting part isn't that change is happening. Change has always happened and it's always going to happen. The interesting part is how ordinary people respond to it. Will we stay curious? Will we keep asking questions? Will we understand the tools we're using? Or will we slowly hand over more and more decisions without ever noticing that we've done it? These are human questions. Every episode of this series of the podcast, I want to leave you with what I'm calling today's hidden truth. And today's hidden truth is this: every person, every company, every church, every government, every organization has an identity. Every one of them has incentives, and every one of them eventually reveals itself through their behavior. Words matter, mission statements matter, promises matter, but behavior is hard to fake. So don't just listen, watch. Watch what people repeatedly choose. Watch where the resources go. Watch who gets rewarded. Watch what gets protected. Watch what people are willing to sacrifice because behavior leaves clues every single time. And if you've listened this far, I hope you don't leave this episode thinking AI is scary, because honestly, that's not necessarily what I think. I use AI almost every day. It helped me organize this episode. It helps me learn. It helps me ask better questions. Technology itself isn't the lesson. The lesson is awareness. The lesson is learning to pay attention, learning to ask better questions, learning to understand the systems that are quietly shaping our lives. Because the more we understand, the more freedom we have to make intentional decisions. That's really what the life we hide is about. Whether we're talking about faith, family, addiction, trauma, politics, or artificial intelligence, our own personal stories, I'm interested in one thing: what's happening beneath the surface? Because that's usually where the story is. It's easy to react, it's much harder and much more valuable to understand. So, over the next week, I want to leave you with one question. Not about AI, about your own life. What have you accepted as normal without ever stopping to ask why? Maybe it's a habit, maybe it's a belief, maybe it's something you were taught, maybe it's even a piece of technology you use every day. Whatever it is, be curious. Ask questions, pay attention, because sometimes the most important parts of life are the ones we never notice. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you found this episode useful, share it with someone who's curious about the world and where it's headed. And if there's a topic you'd like us to explore, I'd love to hear from you. Next time, we're going to follow the money. Who's funding this race? Why are nations investing trillions in AI? And what history teaches us about what happens when the world's biggest powers compete over a technology that they believe will shape the future? So, until next time, this has been The Life We Had.